You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The weather. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Good afternoon, welcome back. Meteorologist Mike Seidel as Beta is crawling towards the Texas coast. It's been moving so slowly. Now 5 miles an hour to the northwest. It is 25 miles southeast of Port O'Connor, Texas. So that's going to bring it in probably near or just north of us later on this evening at that rate. And you can see what we're dealing with. This is the worst that Beta's thrown at us over the past hour. We had a pretty good squall come through as far as the rainfall rate. We're now over an inch of rain so far today, so we're not getting, this is not Sally. We're not going to get double-digit rainfalls here. Not a chance. We don't have enough moisture. The one reason is because we got so much dry air, and that's one of the reasons that Beta did not strengthen to a hurricane. It tried yesterday. It tried several times to really fire up, but every time the convection blew up, the dry air came in, got entrained, got sucked into it, and there you go, kaput. Not completely kaput, but right now we have a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm, and you can see this is pretty frothy. Not your best fishing day here for redfish, and I know the fishermen want to get back out, but it's going to be a few days. Not today, not tomorrow. Maybe by Thursday things will wind down a little bit because this is a slow-moving system. Certainly the wind field will wind down. And again, reminding you, this is not the Gulf. This is Matagorda Bay. The Gulf is way out there. You can't see it. Not enough visibility as far as the barrier island, and that's blocking the big waves from rolling all the way in here. That's not the case at Aransas. We've seen the pictures from Galveston Island, Jamaica Beach, big waves battering the beaches and eating up the sand. So a lot of beach erosion. Again, coastal impacts by far will be the story with this one, and we'll see if we have any significant rainfall impacts inland, Mike. So far as I know, we haven't had our first flash flood warning. Let's hope this rain that comes in keeps moving like it's doing here, and we're not getting the big training bands like we've seen in previous systems.
That's the big hope here, Mike. It looks rough there, but you know, I think we can get through this as long as Beta behaves and moves along as predicted in the forecast here. Mike, thank you so much, but it's going to be rough here for next day or two, that's for sure. By the way, new video to show you here, the 61st Street Pier in Galveston, Texas. Mike was talking about those waves. They've been a lot more significant in the upper Texas coast, and that's been the result. Boy, taking out parts of that pier and into the drink it goes. You hate to see stuff like this, but on the way it floats. The folks, there's a real danger in that water. Boy, you want to be nowhere near it, that is for sure. Even with a weak low-end tropical storm like we have now, it's just the persistence of it that can really do a number on structures like piers like that. A 45-mile-per-hour winds right now, so again, it's a lower-end tropical storm. Northwest movement at 5. We're really, really close to the coastline at this point, almost at us at Port O'Connor here. And we're going to be drifting off to the northwest here pretty slowly here, about 5 miles per hour. But you can see there's hardly anything to it. It doesn't have much, at least on the signature of the infrared satellite, it doesn't have much to it. You look at the visible satellite, it's kind of hard to even figure out where exactly the center is. Is it, was it maybe down in here? Is it sitting up in here somewhere? Is it maybe right on the coastline already. It's a little bit hard on the visible to determine where that is. You know, maybe the hurricane hunters have figured that, or they can get some different technology we can use besides the planes, but at this point, it's basically there, I would say. Corpus Christi, gust to 26, but notice the wind direction is coming out of the northwest here. Houston, 17, Lake Charles, 22, and gusty even over towards, say, New Orleans at 22 miles per hour. Here come the bands, different bands of rain that'll roll through Port O'Connor, where Mike is getting hit now, and there could be times where you're going to get breaks. Then you're going to get right back into it. And then the showers on the extreme other side of this up around, say, Grand Isle, Louisiana. So as it moves slightly inland, may hug the coastline here, maybe inland, maybe just offshore, but then pushing off to the north and east here, Jackie, over the course of the next 5 days. So slow move initially, picking up speed at the end of its life.
Well, in the meantime, the East Coast has been feeling the effects of a hurricane, too. This is Hurricane Teddy, which is more than 800 miles away from the North Carolina coast. That's where huge swells have been washing up ashore. North Carolina officials were forced to close a portion of Highway 12 that runs through the Outer Banks yesterday because of all the overwash and sand. In addition, Teddy is creating dangerous rip current conditions all along the Atlantic beaches. So Teddy has been tracking just to the east of Bermuda today, and it's actually expected to intensify as it continues to move on up towards the north. It's going to hook up with the jet stream, and that will allow it to intensify a little bit as it moves up to the north and then makes a close approach to the Canadian Maritimes, perhaps making landfall into parts of Nova Scotia. Not all that often that you'll see tropical storm watches and warnings there, but the way it's affecting us has to do with that cool blast and high pressure that we have up and down the eastern seaboard. That's creating a very strong gradient between the two pressures and that northerly flow, and that is what's pushing up that water, combined with unusually high tides to bring our storm surge flooding up and down the east coast.
A smile.
Good Monday evening, everybody. Welcome back to Weather Underground. We're continuing to track the latest with Tropical Storm Beta that's just crawling and inching its way, Mike, closer to the Texas coastline.
It's going to be a creeper, as we say. You know, she's Jackie Jarris. I'm Mike Bettis. We're going to get to our crews in the field as well, covering it for you from Texas. But another one we've got to keep our eye on, Jackie, because of the amount of rain it could produce and the amount of surge that we're already seeing.
Absolutely. So this is a perfect example of that. Check it out in San Luis Pass, Texas. Utility crews have been out preparing for Tropical Storms Beta's impending landfall. The utility crews hard at work, even in that storm surge. You know, Mike, I feel like this is one of those storms because the impacts, you know, this isn't like a major hurricane. This is a tropical storm that people could underestimate this. Still a couple of feet of storm surge and all this rain certainly could be life-threatening.
It definitely could be. And some of these neighborhoods have been underwater for more than a day already, and they could stay underwater for another day or two, so you're not able to get anywhere. Don't want frustration to set in, and then you get in your car, and then you get into some flood water, and you find yourself in trouble. We just need to be smart, be patient if we can be, and let the storm go by us. I think we can make it through this if we all just, you know, use what's between our ears. 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm force right now. Pressure, it's 999, northwest movement at 5. Basically, it's at land right now. It's very close to it, 25 miles southeast of Port O'Connor, Texas, but I think it's hard to find where the center is truly at this point, but it's gotten, you know, so much overcast around the center of it, it's hard to really figure that out. Corpus Christi has got a 26-mile-per-hour wind, Brownsville 22, Houston, we're at 17 right now. Jamaica Beach, storm surge here, around 4 feet above ground. Aransas Pass here. We've got emergency management reporting some flooding here at Harbor Road, at Highway 361 here, so it's happening. And we're going to get a lot of different areas here where we're going to see that water be pushed in. I think Lake City is a location where the water is going to increase for you here. Galveston already 2.2, St. Louis Pass 2.3. So the water's come up, and it's just enough to put some water in the roadways here. And most of those, at least that are covered now, are impassable. There's again where the center sits. The onshore flow is pretty persistent at this point. Likely to be that way for the next day to 2 days. And then likely flooding in this area that's highlighted in yellow near the coastline here from Port Lavaca to Bay City to Houston to Galveston. That's mostly, again, around the center where you're going to have some of the highest rainfall rates. So there's that slug of rain right there, 3 to 5 inches for most of us, with some spots maybe getting just a little bit more than that. Then another area here in southern Louisiana where we think we could be dealing with some pretty heavy rain as well. There's a look at the track. Again, pushing it off to the north and east here over the course of the next 5 days. But the time frame we're worried about is kind of right in here. The next 3 days, really, Jackie, where it's very slow movement, you know, from Texas to Louisiana.
Yeah, and we've seen some of the heavy squalls we've seen all day that are hitting parts of the Texas coast right now. That includes in the Port O'Connor area, and that's where we find Weather Channel meteorologist Mike Seidel. Mike, what's the latest? Boy, we can see those crashing waves right behind you there.
Yes, every now and then I get a mouthful of salt water. It's so tasty. At least it's, 84, 83 degrees. I've been in those nor'easters and water temps upper 30s. Look at this wave action, Matagorda Bay here in Texas. And remember, we've got that barrier island blocking the waves directly from the Gulf from Beta. This is a pretty good washing machine setup here. Water churning another day where the fishermen, this is a big fishing area. We were in here on Saturday. They were bringing in lots of tasty redfish, but they're not going out today or tomorrow, and maybe not even on Thursday, because it's going to take a while for this to wind down because the system is moving slowly. Now, again, we've got a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm. It'll go down to a depression by tomorrow and then move slowly inland, but then it may come back out over the Gulf. Not expecting it to re-intensify, but again, we're not going to have nice calm waters for at least a few days. The rain is still pelting me, but we're not getting the heavy rain. You can see that squall that's now moved towards south. It rotated in on the northwest side and the west side of Tropical Storm Beta, and giving us some very heavy rain, horizontal rain, and splashing down the streets. But again, no flash flood warning because it moved in and moved out, and now the rain is primarily on the light side, but these winds still gusting upwards of 35 to 40 miles an hour. Remember, this is a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm. We're not going to get 70 or 80-mile-an-hour wind gusts. Let's go back to Atlanta. Jackie Terrace, what's coming up next here on the Weather Channel as we continue our Beta coverage tonight?
Yeah, we're going to continue to track Beta. We're going to talk more and show more images of the storm surge that's been a real problem. But it hasn't been just Beta either. Coming up on Weather Underground, we're going to talk about Hurricane Teddy, which is about 800 miles or better off the U.S. coastline, but it's still causing big problems. We're seeing similar scenes that what we're seeing on the Texas and Louisiana coast, in places like North Carolina, even into parts of Florida. Plus, a glimmer of hope in the West as firefighters struggle to contain deadly wildfires. Find out where the weather moving very slowly near Texas coast.
3 weeks and still no.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow!
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
New video to show you here. A ship really navigating here through the choppy waters of Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf of Mexico. Look at those waves. And you just got to put the bow right into them. You got to steer right into them, right? This is, oh man, it's just, those waves crashing up over the bow there, that is just, well, it just seems like Deadliest Catch or something up in the Gulf of Alaska, doesn't it? It's the Gulf of Mexico. Usually pretty tranquil. There are times you could, I'm serious, you could like just, it's just glass flat, and you just go out there and just you get in a paddle boat and hang out. Not this kind of stuff. That's wild, isn't it? But this is what Tropical Storm Beta is doing for us this evening. No thank you. That is enough to just make your stomach not even have to be on the boat. Your stomach is like, whoa. Folks, it's going to be rough for us the next couple of days. That includes in Texas right now where it's raining, and raining pretty good for us. But the band's coming in from Galveston up toward Houston here, Freeport toward Wharton. We've got a good band that's rolling in for us right now. And then around Port O'Connor, where Mike Seidel has been, we've been plagued by some gusty winds. We've been plagued by the rain. It is really choppy out there in Matagorda Bay, too. And then southern Louisiana, around Grand Isle, we have the rain, mostly a southerly flow here, so you're getting the push of water that might be affecting you right at the edge of the water there. It's not a particularly powerful system right now. Max sustained winds are 45 miles per hour. Corpus Christi, we're gusting to 26, 22 in Brownsville. Houston right now, it's breezy, about 15-mile-per-hour winds. There's a look at the track. May hug the coast, may briefly come inland, may stay off the coast, and eventually picking up a track like this. But from now through tomorrow, it barely moves. It's going to be somewhere right in here. That's about where it is right now, right? Then by Wednesday evening, it's only about where Houston is, so very slow movement here over the course of time. You take a look at the forecast cone with the individual models laid on there. Again, they're all in a similar spot here. Some briefly inland, some at the coastline, some off, and then mostly agreeing that they're going to push. It's going to push off to the north and east here. But you can see there's the wide difference. There's a difference between it being here and being here, right? Northern Louisiana to New Orleans. But ultimately, Jack, it should be weakening each and every step along the way there.
Boy, but it's a long, slow ride between now and then, right? This has just been a crazy year for sure, and we've broken all kinds of records and continue to do so. Beta still hasn't made landfall, but if and when it does, it's going to be our 24th named system that has made it onto getting a name, right? Or 23rd, I'm sorry, Beta is the 23rd. It would be the latest one to make landfall in the U.S., which would put it at number 9. So far we've had 23 named storms. That's way above the average of what we would typically see of just over 8 named storms up to this point in the season. That's ranking number 1 at this point in terms of named storms. As for hurricanes, we've made it up to number 8. 4 of those is what we would typically see in an average season, and we are tied now for second place with that one, and category 3 storms or better. We've had 2 of them, so we're about average in terms of major hurricanes, but boy, we've had a big uptick in the season for sure in the month of September. That's what we would typically expect. September is the peak of hurricane season, and we started early in the month of May, and we just kept going, and those numbers continue to keep going up. Unfortunately, we still have a lot of other balls in the air that we have to keep our eye on. It's not just Beta out there. So this shows you the U.S. landfalls. So far, we have had 8 of them. Beta will make 9, and 9 would tie the record that we've ever had for the most U.S. landfalling tropical systems. That was back in 1916, so it's been a really long time since we've seen this type of activity overall. How much do we have left of the hurricane season? Certainly it can't be over with soon enough. We've got 39%, so finally getting rid of the 4 and we're into the 30%. Certainly can't wait till the end of November for that, Mike.
So many people are looking forward to that time. Jackie, thank you. Now, I know for many of you, boy, you've just stepped outside and you're like, oh yes, cool temperatures have arrived. Hey, some leaves are starting to change color here in Norton Pond, Vermont. What a view is that? That is incredible. Take me to Vermont like ASAP. This is where the Crimson Swamp maples are now starting to show some color. That'd be the orange and the orangish reddish colors that you see maples usually do in the red color out there. But yeah, it's gotten cool. It feels like fall. You definitely want to get outside and enjoy this. From the northeast to the south, temperatures trending below average. 61 in Portland, 66 in Cleveland. So comfortable in Atlanta. Jackson, 73. So nice. Low dew points as well, so the air is dry. You've really got to go down to Florida or maybe have some influence from Beta to get the humidity. But a touch of fall tomorrow in a lot of places too. Maybe even more than a touch of fall. Binghamton forecast to tie a record. Lynchburg forecast to tie a record close to it. In Pittsburgh, we're getting down to 39 degrees tomorrow morning in Pittsburgh and a 37 for you in Allentown. You'll have to have the jacket on in the morning. For Atlanta, you'll wake up to 52 in the morning with an afternoon high of 72. What a great fall day is that, huh? First day of fall tomorrow, astronomical fall. And then Tuesday night, you're down to 57. Loving it, considering the average high is about 81. All right, still to come here on Weather Underground, taking you back to the Gulf Coast for more on Tropical Storm Beta and where that threat of heavier rain and flash flooding continues to increase. We'll get you back to Mike Seidel and Port O'Connor after this.
Most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
Check this out. This is in the coastal town of Kemah, Texas here. Surge pushing that water here up over the rocks at times. The splash comes on up. Again, we're pretty fortified here, but doing a number there on some of the piers. But look at all the debris that's in the water, huh? Stuff's getting eaten up, folks. There's going to be some repair. And this is going to go on for days, at least 2, if not potentially 3. All right, so welcome back to our coverage of Tropical Storm Beta, sitting right at the Texas coast tonight. Could potentially make a landfall this evening, may go inland, could actually even stay offshore just a couple of miles and just hang out for a while. 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm, northwest movement at 5 miles per hour. It's slowed its forward speed just ever so slightly here and sits 25 miles southeast of Port O'Connor, Texas. We're going to take you to Mike Seidel in Port O'Connor here in just a little bit. Again, notice it's just kind of hanging out around Port O'Connor here. It's going to be the same persistent onshore flow on the right front side of that. The wind speed's going to come down marginally here, but a very slow movement through Thursday evening all the way over toward Alexandria. That's 3 days from now, and it's only moved, this much. It's going to be with us for a while. It's going to be with us all week long. And then you look at what's going on here with some of these rain bands. We're getting persistent rain bands, onshore flow as well into Galveston. That's why we've seen the water rise here about 2.5 feet. And we're going to see some pockets here, 3 to 5 inches in some areas, even in Louisiana. European models cranking out a foot of rain, if not more. And then you take a look at the U.S. GFS model, significantly less rain, with some places here in Texas, 3 to 5, and then moving a little bit more of the rain farther north in the European model, and again, a lot less. Now, since September 1st, all right, since the beginning of the month, we've had a lot of rain in Texas for the year. They're still running some deficits in spots, but notice a lot of areas here across the Gulf Coast have had a ton of rain. Flash flood watches are still in effect here. Rockport all the way back toward New Orleans and Grand Isle and Shell Beach here. And right in the heart of that are places that are very flood prone, including Houston, Galveston, and over toward Lake Charles. And Lake Charles, we're still recovering after Hurricane Loris hit a Category 4 about 3.5 weeks ago. So the last thing we want to see is more weather like this. But Jack, it's going to be a slow slog for us here, just slowly pushing its way through Texas and Louisiana here over the course of the next 2 to 3 days.
Yeah, it's almost the kind of rain that we actually need across parts of the West, right? Something that moves slow, that just brings a steady light rain over several days' time, because the Bobcat fire continues to burn now in Southern California. It's still going strong. This is 15 days after it ignited. It burned more than 105,000 acres now. Crews say at this rate, the fire won't be contained until the end of October. So 15% containment. It's going for 15 days. So the Bobcat fire doubled in size this weekend. And elsewhere, fire dangers are going to be decreasing across parts of the West. We are going to get some moisture in here eventually, more likely in the Pacific Northwest as opposed to in parts of California. More than 3 million acres have been consumed now in the state of California. And this shows you that so many of them are widespread across the region, and they're very large. They're complexes of fires that go over 100,000 acres, even more in some instances. Here's a look at the wind conditions. The winds haven't been too bad, and that's the good news, is that our winds have died down a little bit, but one of the biggest issues is that our vegetation has dried out and our humidity levels remain really, really low. Anything below 20-25% is poor, and so we're seeing a lot of teens, especially in the interior into the Four Corners region. As for the Pacific Northwest, of course, Oregon, you've got your fair share of fires that continue to burn here. More than 1 million acres have been consumed. Now, we will see some changes into the Pacific Northwest with our weather pattern. We've got a cold front offshore that's working its way in, and this is going to bring some pretty good rains coming in, especially by the middle of the week. Now, one of the things we really have to watch is the last bout of rain that we had brought a little too much over some of the burn scar areas, and that can lead to debris flows and to mudslides. So that's going to be a concern going forward, but the rainfall overall should slow down that fire risk. Notice the big concentration of it up here into the Cascades over towards the Olympic Mountains. That's where the big bullseye is for the rainfall. And when we put that on top of the graphic of where all the fires are compared to where the rainfall is, we still really need it down here. And unfortunately, we're not seeing any signs of any rain that's going to be reaching California. Unfortunately, the humidity may go up just a little bit. Now, as for the drought conditions, those are still ongoing, most severe in the northern parts of California, as well as into much of Oregon, where it's really really widespread, exceptional drought in the interior into the Four Corners. But notice coastal areas in Southern California, that drought not too bad. So hopefully we're going to be making some progress here. At least humidity, you know, Mike, we'll take that.
100%. Jackie, thank you so much for that. Still to come in our next hour, tracking Tropical Storm Beta. See where the threat of flash flooding is a big concern for days to come, too, as we've got a slow-moving system crawling ashore in Texas. More live coverage from Port O'Connor, Texas, when we return. Next on Weather Underground, live coverage of Tropical Storm Beta. This system moments away, we think, from a Texas landfall. Bands of thunderstorms, coastal flooding, gusty winds already arriving in advance. And we take you live to the coast there, where the threat of heavy rain and flooding could last for days to come, even after Beta comes ashore.
Chilly fall temperatures invading much of the east, and there's some other problems along the coast. Find out why the same system bringing those temperatures down is combining with a hurricane nearly 800 miles away to help fuel coastal flooding and wash over roadways. Plus, the latest from the ongoing crisis in the West, where deadly wildfires continue to rage. But there's potential good news for one of the hard-hit areas. That's next on Weather Underground.
Welcome in, everyone. Glad you could join us for this Monday edition of Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris, and we are with you tonight, an extended version of Weather Underground until 9 o'clock Eastern as we continue to track Tropical Storm Beta swirling out over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Mike, another creeper one.
Yeah, this one's going to be a slow mover, unfortunately, and we already know that there have been big issues, including this right here, Jackie, with the waves doing a number in Galveston on the pier.
Yeah, you know, I was a little surprised when I saw this, but it really shows you that, you know, just a tropical storm, we hate to say that word, can cause all kinds of problems, property damage and life-threatening issues. So you can really see the wave action here. That's the 61st Street Pier in Galveston, and a whole big chunk of that went off. And Mike, tell me if I'm wrong. Did you see people on the pier at that time? What is that?
I don't know. I don't know what that is at the end.
Like
I think those are like gates to keep you from getting out to the end, maybe.
Maybe.
I don't think those are people.
Let's hope not. That would be scary. Wow, incredible. So let's give you the latest here on Beta. Large battering waves continue to be a problem. Storm surge continues to be a problem, and the threat of rainfall that may lead to some flash flooding. So far, we've been doing okay with the rainfall, but that could change over time because this thing is moving so very slowly. 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm. The intensity has not changed through most of the day today. And look at the forward speed, only 5 miles per hour. So do the math. When it's 25 miles away from the coast, you know, divide that by 5. We're talking 5 hours away for landfall. If it ever gets there, because the models are kind of scraping it along the coast and eventually pushing it off towards the east. Tropical storm warnings remain in effect from just west or south of Port O'Connor all the way over towards Morgan City, Louisiana. That's where we've already been experiencing these conditions throughout much of the day for today. It's really disorganized. You know, it's a tropical storm, and so we're not seeing all the rain confined or in this concentric location. It's kind of spread out all over the place, and the tropical storm force winds extend out about 175 miles from the center of the storm. So we've got all of this rain over here into parts of Louisiana, and we've had this persistent push in here too, moving into the Houston area. In fact, you've been seeing some of your heaviest rains through the day, pushing in on the south side of town right now. So this could total up to a couple of inches before the day is done, Mike, and we'll have to watch with that slow movement if we'll get any more flooding. But surge flooding, of course, that's been an issue here as well. And just to look at some of those reports indicating that water over the roadways here around Port O'Connor, as well as some storm surge inundation in the Jones Creek area.
And this is going to go on for days. And we saw it happening yesterday already. We're seeing it again today. We'll probably be at that tomorrow and the day after. You know, we've got very weak steering currents out there. You know, the center of it, you know, technically sits off the coast here, but I'd even make the argument it might actually be on the coast at this point. It's hard to even determine where the center of this is, but weak steering currents. We've got dry air that's pulled into this on the western side. It's kind of wrapping around even the eastern side, but weak steering keeps it kind of around, but not moving much. It's going to meander mostly to the northeast here, but riding along the periphery of this high pressure for the most part. But that's blocking it at this point from really making any significant moves to the east here. And high pressure sitting over top of it here. You know, we thought that might allow it to strengthen a little bit, but there's so much dry air getting into this thing that's not going to happen. Land interaction now too, and the really strong steering currents are all up here to the north. You've seen a really powerful front trough that have dug through the east. And you can see, again, we're basically going to have the thing sit for the next 24 hours almost where it is, right? Even by tomorrow afternoon, it's barely budged. So it might just stall out completely here. And then gradually pushing its way along the upper Texas coast, may even come out briefly over the Gulf of Mexico, but it could be anywhere between inland or offshore. That's a big wide stretch here over the course of the next 3 days here, and then going up into the Tennessee Valley. And the models for the most part are within the cone here. They all do the same thing, just have it hanging out here for the next day or so around Port O'Connor, Texas, and then pushing its way back to the east or northeast here. You know, some take a little bit farther south, some take a little bit farther north. So if we can get a southerly track, that may put all the effects mostly out over water. If we keep it over land like this and keep it slow, that's going to prolong our rain here, lead to potentially some more flooding, and then pushing it off to the north and east here, as a lot of the model do, although some of them do get a little squirrely. And, you know, GFS model even takes it, you know, the core of it back up toward Oklahoma here. So, Jackie, the longer term, we don't know exactly, but short term here, next day to two, Texas in particular is in for a pounding from this one.
Yeah, one of the places we're worried about for that impact and threat is going to be the city of Houston. Tropical Storm Beta has been bringing some heavy rain there and also posing a risk of some flooding. Our Weather Channel meteorologist Paul Goodlow is there and joining us live now. And Paul, you've seen some pretty decent rain bands push through the Houston metro over the last couple of hours.
We have. That's always a concern here because Houston, this metro area, about 7 million people, we know flooding way too well. In fact, 3 years ago, of course, we had a disaster called Harvey. Yes, it made landfall in coastal Texas, but it was a rainfall disaster here in this city. Some areas 40, 50, 60 inches of rain. Right now, more than an inch of rain. You can see what it's doing to this ground here. Granted, this is kind of fill, and we got Buffalo Bayou off the side, but now we're starting to see some ponding here because of the slow kind of drip from the sky here. Buffalo Bayou just off to my right. You can see behind me, it's actually a little higher than it normally is. Normally it's well in its banks. So that's something we're watching. But you see the skyline here. Beautiful city. We talked to the mayor earlier about this because, again, like I said, Houston is no stranger to tropical events bringing rain and other types of concerns. And here's what he had to say.
Every storm is different. Every storm has its personality. 1 year ago today was Tropical Storm Imelda. So just because it's a tropical storm doesn't mean you don't take the necessary precautions. And so police, fire, Houston Public Works, we position our assets. We expect to get more rain towards the southern end of the city of Houston. So we'll position a few more assets on that end.
And this city has definitely learned from Harvey, and they are definitely prepared to respond. But you can't stop Mother Nature. Now, in terms of the center of Beta, we're about, say, 90 miles away from the center, but we're still seeing a decent amount of rain from this area. We talked about the dry air, but that might be on the north and west side, but not here on the northeast side. We're still seeing this kind of flow of moisture coming right in from the Gulf over Galveston, which is about 45 miles to our south, and then right on through downtown, and then on through the rest of the metro area. So that's the concern, because even at this time tomorrow, we are still not even past with the center of Beta. So we're going to have that constant kind of counterclockwise flow, bringing this moisture kind of conveyor belt right here. And it sets up over Houston. That's a concern. We could deal with an inch or maybe even 2 inches of rain today, maybe tomorrow. But after that, or if we have 2 or 3 or 4 inches a day, that's where we get into trouble. So, you know, it really depends on where those bands set up. We found that also with Harvey 3 years ago. Some areas just get inundated hour after hour of rain. That's what we don't know for sure will happen. That's more of a kind of small scale thing that we just cannot forecast exactly, but that's why we're here. We got, you know, the fourth largest city in the country could be dealing with yet more flooding issues. Hopefully not citywide, and hopefully we just stay in the floodplain areas, but we don't know yet, because, you know, it might take another 36 hours before that center of Beta finally pushes past the Houston metro area. Guys?
All right, thanks so much, Paul. That is a long ways away for sure. Well, heavy rain bands from Beta arrived in Texas more than 24 hours ago already, and we've seen reports of widespread flooding in Port O'Connor. Our crews got stuck in this downpour earlier this morning. So rainfall will continue to be a pretty big deal here with Beta, and one of the biggest threats, and Paul mentioned, could be 36 hours that you're dealing with the threat of heavy downpours before Beta begins to push out of here. Taking a look at the active radar right now, Houston is one of the areas we're watching within this banding area that could be leading to that flash flooding. In fact, he talked about the micro scale part of all of it. Well, we've got an outlook that's been issued for some of those bands because it could add up to more than 3 inches between now and the end of the evening, around 9 o'clock or so. Radar already estimating you've had around 1 to 2 inches to the south and west of Houston, and even as much as 4 in a couple of areas. And then we've had our bands that have been moving in across parts of Louisiana. You've had around 1 inch or 2 of rainfall. So flash flooding, certainly a possibility here, most likely in the Gold area from Galveston through Houston, stretching down towards Bay City, even into Port Lavaca. But notice it could go farther to the north of that as well. What about tomorrow? Some of the same areas will be vulnerable because of the slow nature of all this. Again, Houston, Galveston, stretching closer towards Beaumont and Port Arthur, and then another area because of those outer bands and that onshore flow pushing into southeastern Louisiana. Perhaps Baton Rouge could get in on the greater risk of that localized flooding. So the model's showing us several areas. When you have a disorganized system like this, it's really hard to pinpoint where the heaviest of rain is going to be. So our models generally are saying, okay, maybe near where the center is making landfall, and then also over here in Louisiana where we'll have that onshore flow and that second push in some of those outer bands. The Euro model has really been robust with some of these numbers. It might be overdoing it just a little bit, but the GFS is showing widespread areas of 3 to 5 inches of rainfall. So keep in mind, some of this is going to be coming into Mississippi potentially as we begin to pick up some forward speed as we head into your Tuesday and into your Wednesday as well. So our future radar giving you a good idea of what's going to be happening here over time with just that slow nature and that slow movement of this system. So be prepared for periodic rain bands, showers, yes, some embedded thunderstorms. We can't rule out tropical tornadoes, but it looks like that threat is relatively small overall. We'll really have to keep an eye on that, especially in the afternoon hours for tomorrow with some of these outer bands. But, look at that, Mike. This model showing it moves inland, but not by very much.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't know if it necessarily matters, though, if we're going to see a landfall or if it just stays just off the coast. I think the results are pretty much the same. You take a look at what the high-res future radar pegs for us here in Houston. Bands of rain over and over again. This will happen for the next 2 days at least. Again, if we can get breaks in between the bands, unlike what we had, with Hurricane Harvey a couple of years ago, where it just never stopped raining, then I think we're going to be okay. If we get breaks in between, I think we can manage some of the rain that rolls in. Yes, is the ground going to get really soggy? Yes. But could we get through this with just minor flooding? Maybe none at all. It's possible. It's just going to depend exactly where the bands go and at what time. 2 to 4 inches right now for us is the forecast in Houston. Maybe some pockets where you get just slightly more than that. But over the course of 2 days, it's manageable. It certainly is manageable. All right, through the arc of the text we go. Texarkana sitting up here. Here's Shreveport. Also some heavier rain bands will roll in for us. More likely, though, as we get toward Tuesday and Wednesday. Yes, we'll have some spits and bouts here through tonight, but mostly the heavier rain comes in midday tomorrow. Likely last through Thursday, maybe even late on Thursday. You can see those heavier bands coming in for Tuesday evening. How much do we get? Through Wednesday evening, about 2 inches, although I still think it could be raining even on Thursday. Got a long way to go here, Jackie. Several days before this thing is out of our hair.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of storm surge too here so far, Mike, with that onshore flow pushing the water from the ocean up over the land in areas that are normally dry into southeastern Texas neighborhoods. The rising storm surge, a big threat when it comes to Tropical Storm Beta. So we do have storm surge warnings that are in effect right now, and this really stretches over an area from about Port Aransas all the way over to about Port Arthur. So that shows you the whole area that's being impacted by this, and water level rises rises generally have been around 1 to 3 feet, but it's enough to not only be a nuisance, but also to cause some damage. We've seen lots of roads that have been covered up by water that have also been chopped up because of the wave action and the erosion because of the water. We've got coastal flood warnings on the periphery of where we've got the storm surge warnings in effect. And with the slow movement of this, we're going to see that onshore flow, meaning we'll go through more high tide cycles. So we're going to see that tonight. We're going to see that into tomorrow as well. Check out the levels here in Port O'Connor. You're up over 2 feet, over 2 feet in Eagle Point as well, and you're close to it in a place like Freeport. And then let's look at what the winds are doing over here in Louisiana. We're generally looking at that flow coming in from the east, northeast. It's almost like a nor'easter in a way into the Gulf, isn't it? With some of the wind direction that we've been dealing with persistently with all of this. Wind gusts 30 to as much as 40 miles per hour have been common. So not enough to cause a lot of damage because of the winds, but some. And it's really just the fact that it's been so steady and pushing in that direction. So look at the Bonnet Carré floodway. They're up to just over 4 feet here. Shell Beach, about 2.5 feet. You were up over 3 yesterday, so come down a little bit at this time. So it's really the combination of the tide cycle coming in along with that push of water. So our storm surge potential is a little bit lower compared to what it was yesterday, and that really has to do with the fact that the storm has weakened a little bit, but because of the broad nature of the storm, it really covers a wide area. You don't want to be out there driving around trying to take a look at the ocean and get a look at the waves in the water, because this is what could really get you into trouble, folks. I've seen a lot of video of cars trying to drive through this. This is salt water. It's just not safe to do so. You know, Mike, it only takes 2 feet of water, if that, to float a vehicle. So don't risk that, and make sure you stay away from the ocean.
Gotta be smart. Just gotta be smart. That's all it takes. All right, when we come back, the Texas coast, not the only coastline experiencing water rise. Find out what cool temperatures in a hurricane nearly 800 miles away has in common with scenes like this along the eastern seaboard.
TV News Network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Back to Weather Underground, and we're tracking now our Welcome back to Weather Underground. We're tracking now our 23rd named storm, Beta. Tropical storm Beta now approaching the Texas coast. Probably going to make landfall sometime tonight. We're in Houston, Texas, and we've been seeing rain all afternoon long. Well over an inch of rain has fallen. And take a look at Buffalo Bayou. Normally, it's about 3 to 4 feet lower than it is right now. It looks fairly high, but here's the thing. This is going to continue to rise and go higher and higher and higher. And just to put it in perspective, during Hurricane Harvey just over 3 years ago, that bayou was up here, in fact, over my head, probably by another maybe 4 or 5 feet. That's how high that bayou got when you had that record-setting rainfall event with Harvey kind of coming in and stalling. We're concerned with the same thing, the slow movement of Beta coming through. In fact, even by this time tomorrow, we still might not have that center past Houston, which means if we get kind of stuck in this conveyor belt of this tropical moisture, this rain, we're definitely going to see that bayou and other rivers and creeks around here a lot higher to continue to rise as we have the rain continue to fall in the fourth largest city here in the country. But, you know, there's a good chance those bands could move away from here. That's what we're hoping for, and that's why we're here. Guys, back to you.
All right, that's our Paul Goodloe tonight. He is in Houston, Texas. Paul, thank you. Take a look at this. A new video to show you the water coming up in New Orleans. You know, we've had a really strong push of water come in. Now, again, New Orleans does not sit right on the Gulf of Mexico. So I gather that's either Lake Borgne, that maybe that's Lake Pontchartrain. I don't exactly know. But we could be dealing with some water in Lake Pontchartrain. That actually could even be, I don't think that's the river. It looks like that's way too wide to be the river. Excuse me? That is Pontchartrain. All right, good to know. And you can see water coming up over the sidewalk there. So just another place. And look how far away we are in New Orleans. New Orleans nowhere close to where the center of this thing is, right? And that just goes to show you that these tropical systems, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, where it's kind of encased, you could have issues. So there's where the system sits. Listen, New Orleans is way over here. All right, that's like Pontchartrain right there. There's where Beta is. Again, nowhere close to each other, but we're getting a strong push, and it's been mostly a southerly push the whole time, so Pontchartrain has issues. Not extreme, but there's a little bit of overwash, right? 45-mile-per-hour winds with Tropical Storm Beta right now, northwest movement at 5. We think if it continues on that track, it makes a landfall here in the next few hours in Texas. So just something to keep an eye on here. I don't know if that really matters, the landfall necessarily. It's going to kind of hang out where it is over the course of the next 2 days, probably. At least for the next day, it's going to be about right here. It may not move out of that circle. It's basically going to become stationary. Then a very slow movement that takes it off to the northeast here. And I mean very slow. Probably stays in Texas until at least sometime on Wednesday. Then may stay in Louisiana to Thursday. Winds breezy, but not extreme. 15 in Houston, 17 Corpus Christi, gusting to 21 in Lake Charles. We can manage that, Jackie, if we keep the winds here. Maybe they could even go tick a little bit higher. I think we'll really not have too many issues with wind damage whatsoever. It's all about the surge at this point, and it's all about the rain.
Right. So we've seen a lot of surge on the East Coast as well, not just today, but we saw it yesterday and the day before. And this is from a completely different system, from Hurricane Teddy, plus a couple of other factors that are contributing to it. This is a hurricane that's hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So that's Juno Beach, Florida, that you can see behind me with the rough waves. We've had huge, large battering waves, in fact, even as much as 60 feet out over the open water. Certainly not seeing those on the shore, but rip currents has been a real problem with this as well. This is a Category 1 hurricane, 90-mile-per-hour maximum sustained winds, and there you can see just shy of 800 miles away from Hatteras, North Carolina, and we're having impacts that far away. Teddy's moving up towards the north. It's east of Bermuda, so they did not take a direct hit, but they've been dealing with tropical storm conditions all day long. Some intensification may be expected as this moves up to the north because it's going to combine with a trough in the jet stream, and that could inject a little bit of energy into this before potentially making landfall over Nova Scotia. So we have a big difference in pressure between the low pressure of Teddy and high pressure that's bringing all of our beautiful fall conditions up and down the East Coast, but that's driving in that steady north to northeasterly flow and pushing that water up, and why we have such huge battering waves and why we're seeing some of that surge and coastal flooding. So we've seen water covering the highways in some spots. Now, as Teddy continues to move up to the north, we'll watch that water and that surge issue, along with erosion into the beaches and rip currents, work its way into parts of New England. So we do have rip current threats all the way up and down the eastern seaboard throughout the day for today. That will likely continue into tomorrow as well. Well, we have much more to come here on Weather Underground. We want to make sure that you stay with us. So we've got live reports coming up on Tropical Storm Beta. 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm just kind of hovering there off the coast. Will it make landfall this evening?
Tropical Storm Beta for you tonight, right here on Weather Underground, potentially just a few hours away from landfall in Texas. Thanks for being with us. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris, or it might linger a little longer, right?
Who knows at this
point,
right?
Over the water. it's going to be a close shave either way, but the impacts is what it's really all about. We've been seeing that all day today and all day yesterday. Look at this. This is storm surge catching some drivers off guard apparently this morning. Several people had to be saved during high rescue calls. So Mike, this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier, that, it's a couple feet of storm surge, and if you don't drive in it, you're going to be A-okay, but people are taking that risk out there, unfortunately, whether it's this or flash flooding. You never want to go into that water.
You do not. The thing that we've seen about the flooding with this one is we haven't seen, really fast-moving water, anything like that. It's a lot of standing water, and it's a foot deep, it's 2 feet deep, maybe it's thigh-high, right? But if you drive into that, you're potentially going to stall out your car. You're going to find yourself in need of rescue. And a lot of times, you won't get the tow trucks to go out and rescue you out of storm surge water. You know why? It'll rust their chains. They don't want to put those chains in salt water. No one may even come get you. I'm just giving you a little tip there. A Tropical Storm Beta, boy, it's just hugging the coastline right now, isn't it? 45-mile-per-hour winds right now, north movement at 5 miles per hour. Could potentially mean a landfall at some point here over the next few hours if it continues on that path. But ultimately, the results are the same. Whether it comes onshore by a couple of miles, stays offshore by the couple of miles, I don't think it really matters all that much. You see that we've got high water in a lot of different places here. Aransas Pass here, high water reported by Emergency Management in Jamaica Beach. We've had storm surge around St. Louis Pass here, about 4 feet above normally dry ground. You can see with this onshore push here, the water is coming up for us here. Galveston Bay, 2.5 feet. Galveston Pier, similar. St. Louis Pass, 2.6 feet. And if the center's sitting right in there, everything on this side is going to give you sound side flooding. Then everything on this side gives you Gulf side flooding. Even, by the way, up around Port Arthur, 2.1 feet of surge happening there. Likely going to get some flooding because of the rain right there near the coastline, especially with a very slow-moving system over the next 2 days. The modeled forecast is this: 3 to 5 generally from near, say, Port O'Connor, Texas, up to around Houston and Galveston, with some pockets of a little bit more than that. Also, some periods of heavy rain could happen for us across Louisiana as well. And then we take a look at the forecast positions and tracks here. Where could it be by this time tomorrow? It could be right there. I mean, it barely moves, right? It could be up here, but that's still hardly any movement. It could be down here. It's barely going to move for the next 24 hours. And even by, say, Wednesday, it's going to be somewhere between here and here. Also, very slow movement. So that could allow us to really maximize some of the rain here. Will it be onshore? Will it be offshore? Seems like it's a pretty wide spread considering how tight the window here is, Jackie. But ultimately what it means is be prepared for continued storm surge here. Be prepared for continued heavy rain.
Yeah, let's talk more about that rain and the risk for flash flooding. There's one area that I'm really focusing in on right now where the rain has been pretty persistent for the last couple of hours. And you've had rain on top of that from yesterday, so that our ground is already pretty saturated. And it's this pocket, this area between about Houston and Galveston all the way over towards Port O'Connor. And that's where we're seeing some of the heaviest rainfall now. That little area there with the onshore flow and the persistent rain showers could realize some localized flash flooding within the next couple of hours. So if you live in that area, just a big heads up, this is a good night to just stay inside, stay home, stay dry. Flash flooding will be most likely into this dark yellow area, but notice the possibility stretching even farther on up towards the north, towards Texarkana, as we could get some of those outer bands swinging up your way. And then tomorrow into the afternoon, lingering into your Wednesday morning, we've got a couple of spots, again, pockets where the rain will likely be heaviest. So it's near where the center will be, Houston, Galveston, and then in some of the outer rain bands over here into parts of Louisiana. Excuse me. Let's show you the rainfall forecast totals, the main areas that we're going to be concerned about. And when you have a large storm like this, but not a very strong organized one, the rain is very difficult to predict exactly where the heaviest stuff is going to be, and it can be spread out far away from that center. And so you can see it kind of comes out in chunks, doesn't it? We see some heavy rainfall over here near Houston. We see some heavy rainfall in south central Louisiana, maybe over here into Mississippi, Alabama, and maybe even up here near the Arklamis region. So folks all throughout this region do need to be prepared for the potential of heavy downpours that could lead to localized flooding over the next couple of days. The GFS not quite as impressive as the Euro, but 3 to 5 is a good number to have in mind. Well, coming up on Weather Underground, Hurricane Teddy, nearly 800 miles off the Carolina coastline, but still causing some big problems. See where high tides and big waves will continue to fuel coastal flooding. Plus, a glimmer of hope in the west as firefighters struggle to contain deadly wildfires. Find out whether the weather will be changing for the better.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
All right, we've got some new video to show you here, and boy, this is one that's going to make your stomach do somersaults. This is off the coast of Louisiana, and look at these waves. They're huge. So you gotta steer right into them. And look at the waves that are going to crash up over the bow. Whoa! Oh my gosh, it's... Yeah, I think even the captain is impressed. That is some spooky stuff there, folks. It's like Deadliest Catch stuff, isn't it? That's nuts. Although the water's a little warmer than it would be for Deadliest Catch. But that's all because of a tropical storm named Beta. And Beta is way over in Texas, by the way, all right? But we're still getting the effects even as far away as Louisiana right now. So where do we stand currently? We've got some rain that's falling for us right now with an onshore flow here just hammering us in Houston and Galveston, Freeport and Wharton, Port O'Connor getting hit, Victoria. We'll get some rain showers as well. The low itself, Beta sits, about right in here or so. There's not an eye. We don't typically have that with a tropical system. I feel like it's kind of hard to even find where the center of circulation even is at this point. And then you can see the onshore flow that we've got here in Louisiana, and this is why the waves have been really churned up here. And it's also why we've actually seen a little bit of overwash in Lake Pontchartrain north of New Orleans. Wild, right? All right, so there's your onshore flow there. There's your southerly flow there. Everything's counterclockwise around our low. Augusta and Lake Charles are right now at 21, and we're in for some rain here over the next few days. Not a ton of movement out of this. Short term here, next 2 days, it's likely only to move about this far. Then after that, it gets a little bit faster and pushes across the southeast. But ultimately what it means, Jackie, is a lot of rain and still persistent storm surge out ahead of it.
Yeah, it makes for a long week, that's for sure, with all kinds of impacts continuing. It's been a really impactful season overall. We've had so many named storms, and we're not done yet. We are still in the heart of hurricane season, but we've past that hump, right? We're just over what you would call hump day. So take a look at those numbers, and that really shows you we've got about 39% of the season still ahead of us. Hurricane season doesn't end till the end of November, but typically we'll start to see the season start to wane a little bit by the middle of October. But as we take a look at these numbers, this will show you all of the named storms that we've had so far this season. We started early in the month of May, and that activity just kept on going, and it kept on going, and it kept on going. We've had 10 named storms now in the month of September alone, and we may not be done just yet. So when we take a look at the numbers where we've been and what we would typically see, notice we usually would have just over 8 named storms, and we've had 23. So we rank number 1 up to this point in the season. 2005, we had more named storms overall, but up to this point in the season, you did not. So that's why we're at number 1 right now. As for hurricanes, we've had 8. Typically, you would have 4, so we're tied with second place on that. And as for major hurricanes, that's category 3 or better. We're about where we should be, so a little bit lacking in terms of the major hurricanes, which I think is probably okay with everybody, right? So many of these have made landfall in the U.S. already so far this year, and this shows you all of the named storms from Hannah to Cristobal, Isaias. We can't forget any of them, right? That's 8, but the record for U.S. landfalling systems is 9, and we should tie that as Beta eventually makes its way towards the coast. Mike?
Well, thank you, Jackie. As Tropical Storm Beta kind of meanders toward the Texas coast, the storm's heavy rain and storm surge pose a risk of flooding for the city of Houston. Meteorologist Paul Goodlow is there joining us now live. We know how easily we flood in this city, Paul, but hopefully, your fingers crossed, if we can kind of spread the rain out over several days, we might actually make it through this in Houston.
Yeah, we sure hope so. But, Mike, you were here for Harvey 3 years ago, so you know not only here in downtown with the bayous, even south of the city on towards Galveston, all types of threats with this system. But as Jackie was talking about how this is the 23rd named storm, we're seeing some records here. The key is we still can't get caught up on what this is and where this is. We got to get caught up on where the weather is. The weather is here in Houston. Right now we're seeing some light rain showers, but we're about 90 miles from the center of Beta, and we're still seeing a lot of rain. Areas, say, southwest of Tropical Storm Beta by maybe even 30 miles. Haven't seen as much rain as we've seen here in Houston today. So it's not just major hurricanes that cause problems. Before Harvey shattered records, the records that shattered, Tropical Storm Allison, another tropical storm that kind of came here and stalled and sat. That's the big concern, because you see downtown, we got, I guess, over 2 million just in the city and close to 7 million in the metro area. So a lot of people don't live that high off of sea level. So it's a big concern. You have some heavy rain coming on through. Buffalo Bayou, you can kind of see through the trees here. Normally it's a couple of feet lower, but already this from today's rainfall. Had some rain last night, but moderate rain today. We've had some decent rise of this bayou, and with Beta not moving very fast, we have the potential of seeing heavy rain today, tonight, tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night as well. We hope that doesn't happen. But that's the concern, because even by this time tomorrow and tomorrow night, we still don't have Beta passing Houston. So it still has a conveyor belt of moisture coming right up 45 and into the Bayou City. We got much more Weather Underground ahead. Stick around.
Stouffer's Mac and Cheese is
watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow, live in Houston, specifically close to the Buffalo Bayou. We got Allen Parkway over here to my left. And just to give you kind of perspective, you know, I'm kind of sitting below the roadway, but 3 years ago with Harvey, I'd be sitting under maybe another 6 to 8 to 10 feet of water. You can see the bayou behind me through the trees here. That's already elevated from the heavy rain we had today and even some rain last night, but it's nowhere near where it has been in previous flood events. So I wouldn't call this a flood event yet, but we're hoping it doesn't get that way. We see the grass here. It's kind of fill dirt here, so it doesn't really drain that well. Already seeing the water ponding here. But that's the concern. If we still have bands of heavy rain like we saw today, we will see Buffalo Bayou come up and out of its banks. Now, this kind of parkland is designed to do that, to flood. So this takes the flood versus some of the buildings or the apartment buildings or even the homes that are up and down and apartments up and down Allen Parkway, and also where else Buffalo Bayou kind of meanders before it eventually dumps into Galveston Bay. Galveston, yes, they've been seeing a lot of bayside and soundside flooding with the winds that were kind of more of a northerly easterly component there, but that's going to change slowly. And slowly is the key word here, because Beta is going to slowly make landfall, most likely over the next several hours before we get to midnight. But once it makes landfall, it's going to slowly eventually pass Houston. It won't even pass Houston tonight, not even tomorrow night. And I'll go back to the studio with Mike Bettis, and that's one of the biggest concerns, Mike, is another slow-moving tropical system has the potential to keep dumping and dumping rain. We talk about the dry air, but there's also that moisture tap of that heavy rain, which also is associated with Beta.
It's all on the table for us, Paul. The heavy rain and the surge. Take a look at Galveston. Look at it. Just kind of looks like the waves are marching on shore, doesn't it? That's just that's a wild scene, isn't it? It's kind of crazy to look at that. Now, the good news about Galveston is we don't necessarily anticipate any surge issues. We've got a big seawall that protects us here, and so you get 2.5 feet of storm surge, you'll be fine. But you see that got water on the roads, and it's not going to be a pleasant drive for you tonight. It's going to be kind of raw. It's going to be gusty at times, and you're going to have a rain that's going to be with us probably for the next couple of days. All right, so good view there of exactly what's going on with the Beta tonight as it just sits down here around Port O'Connor. 45-mile-per-hour winds with a 5 o'clock advisory. We'll get another advisory here in about an hour's time or so. Another one will come in at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central time here. Northwest movement at 5 miles per hour, so it's just kind of creeping along here. Potentially could make a landfall this evening if it continues on that 5-mile-per-hour northwest movement here, but it could also maybe just hang out right at the coast or maybe even just slightly off. But the key takeaway here is look at the time. Tomorrow afternoon, it's barely budged. It's going to be somewhere between here and here. It's crazy that it's barely going to move. And then by Wednesday, it's only going to be between here and here. That's it. So what it means is we're in this for a while, folks, and we're probably going to see the continued rain in Houston and Galveston for 2 days plus, and that onshore push keeps the water levels high here. Unfortunately, we've already seen some water in Galveston already on some of the streets. There's not a ton of water, but it's still water over the roadways at this point, and then you get more rainfall like this. Just makes the problem that much worse, Jackie.
Mike, we take you out west now where the Bobcat fire is burning in Southern California. Still strong. It is burning now, still 15 days after it was originally ignited. And now we're learning of new evacuation orders that have been issued for some people that are living south and west of Upper Bay Tujunga. That's east of the Angeles Forest Highway and north of Angeles Crest Highway. The Bobcat fires burned more than 105,000 acres. Crews say the rate of the fire, this fire will not be contained until the end of October. It's 15% contained right now. That's it, 15%. The Bobcat fire doubled in size this weekend, and elsewhere we've got other fire danger concerns, and we've had so many acres that have burned already. So take a look at this. This is just California alone. More than 3 million acres have been consumed here. This is a record-setting pace. And not only are these big fires, they're huge fires. They're complexes of fires that have merged together into one, really giving you an idea of how widespread that is and just how huge it is. And most of the wildfires have all been pushing into the top 5 largest in California's history now. The weather conditions are improving. Our winds are lighter here today, and that's the good news. Take a look at the wind speed. Still some gusty conditions from time to time, but the greater issue remains that the humidity is very low and the vegetation is dry. We're down there in the teens of percentages for relative humidity. Anything below 25% is not good. So when we see 15, 17, that's really, really not good. Oregon, another state that is suffering right now with many wildfires that are burning. More than 1 million acres have been consumed here with multiple fires. But the good news is that we've got a new storm system working its way towards the coast by Wednesday, and through the end of the week, we could see some good rainfall pushing into some of these fire areas. We've got more on Beta right after this.
Owners of select competitive vehicles can get $500 toward a new Acura ILX.
Next on Weather Underground, live coverage of Tropical Storm Beta. The system could be moments away from a Texas landfall. Bands of thunderstorms, coastal flooding, gusty winds already arriving in advance of a landfall. So we're going to take this live to the coast where that threat of flooding, rain, and possibly even storm surge could last for days even after Beta comes ashore.
Plus, we have chilly fall temperatures invading much of the east, and it's helping to contribute to some other problems along the coast. Find out why the same system bringing those temperatures down is combining with a hurricane nearly 800 miles away to fuel coastal flooding and wash over roads. Plus, the latest on the ongoing crisis in the West, where deadly wildfires continue to rage tonight. But there's potential good news for one hard-hit area. That's next on Weather Underground.
Here we go again. Welcome in, folks, to Monday edition of Weather Underground as we track Tropical Storm Beta. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris. We're here with you until 9 o'clock Eastern Time as we track Tropical Storm Beta, which is swirling out over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Mike, I feel like not a ton has changed since we were together last night.
It's almost in the same spot, about doing the same thing we thought it would, and we know that it's going to pose some issues. No, the winds aren't extreme, but it's just been persistent onshore flow, and we think we're going to get some very persistent rain that comes along with it. But we do have some dramatic moments that happened on the 61st Street Pier in Galveston, Texas. Did you see this? Waves are crashing up underneath it, and then eventually it just gives way, and then it'll just break off, and into the Gulf of Mexico it goes. Sad to see.
So that persistence you were talking about, right? Certainly somewhat of a player with this, and it's just been like a big bathtub, hasn't it? The Gulf of Mexico.
I get it. It hasn't been extreme waves, extreme surge, but it's just been nonstop. And I think just the listen. I've said this before. Like if you ran a high intensity 5K race, you might be able to get through that without too much pain. But if you're to run a marathon at a slow pace, that might be a little bit more painful. I feel like that's what Beta is.
I would agree, absolutely. And it's something that we just want to be done with, right? Can we get to the finish line already? I think that's what everybody would like to see and would like to hear. But unfortunately, Beta's like, I'm just going to take my sweet time because I'm only moving at 5 miles per hour. Okay, Beta, let's pick this up a little bit. But it's going to take a while for that to happen because we're really waiting for some of that steering, and it may not come for another day and a half or so before this really starts to pick up some forward speed and begin to move on. So right now it's at a crawl. It's at 5 miles per hour. So this is the latest advisory as of 4 o'clock Central Time. So this is 2 hours old, which it would have indicated if it continued at this forward speed towards the coast that we'd be making landfall 5 hours from them. So that's 3 hours from now that we could be looking at that at the earliest, but the model's kind of indicating this might just kind of start pushing eastward sooner rather than later, keeping it a little bit more over the ocean. But either way, it's not going to intensify anymore with all that dry air in place. It just kind of lingers those impacts a little bit. Tropical storm warnings, this is the latest update on this. All the watches that were in effect, those have been allowed to drop down. So we just have tropical storm warnings from west of Port O'Connor to just to the east of Morgan City. One thing I want to point out, parts of Harris County, including the Houston metro area, you were in the tropical storm warning. You've been allowed to drop that down as well. But it doesn't mean you're not going to have any impacts or threats. And this is the big deal going on right now in the Houston metro, especially on the south side of town, is that you're in some of the heaviest rain bands. And this has been pretty persistent for about 3 hours now. So we're starting to get some flash flood advisories. Brazoria County, you've had more than 3 inches of rainfall here already. Your advisory continues until 6:30 local time. And it looks like we've got one over there in League City for the similar situation. So that's the freshwater flooding. We've also had a lot of storm surge flooding. We're going to have more on that coming up in a little bit. But we also have to watch out for the threat that a few of these storms could be rotating. So we've got some new marine advisories, which have been issued just south of Grand Isle, Louisiana. That's the main band that we have to watch for this. I think the threat of tropical tornadoes overall is fairly low, but it's not zero. So keep that in mind. And if you get warnings, take them seriously. It's going to be hard to see a rotating storm and all that rain. There's a look at the forecast cone as it creeps up towards the north and east eventually and then picks up speed by the end of the week. So with that persistence, I like that word, Mike. I'm going to stick with that one, right? With persistent rains and that threat on top of ground, which is now saturated because we've already had more than 24 hours with rain showers across the region. We've got that flash flood watch that's going to continue for much of southeast Texas and southern Louisiana.
It's just really an ugly forecast. I don't want to sugarcoat it, folks. It's just it's honest. It's just not going to be pretty. We're going to continue to see some onshore flow here. We're going to continue to see the rain. The thing that really saved us from this being a pretty significant storm or hurricane has been all the dry air that's gotten sucked into it. That really hindered its development. And there's just been weak steering flow, and so it hasn't really wanted to make up its mind all that much here. So we came in this direction, then this direction. We're like going to go back like this, almost like a big S. That wind shear, keeping it in check as well. Not a ton of congealed thunderstorm activity around the center. The wind shear has blown some of the tops of this off, not to mention dry air has gotten in there. Now the steering flow, for the most part, has pushed this to the west. That's all courtesy of this high pressure right here. It's blocked it from moving east at all. And so it's just kind of nudging it off to the west very slowly here. And the stronger steering currents have been off to the north here, so it hasn't been under the influence of that at all. It's just been stuck underneath it all. And so the forecast does gradually pull it off to the east here, but over the next 2 days, it's only still right here. Very slow movement overall here. But as you watch what the forecast cone does and what the individual model tracks do, again, pretty decent agreement that it's just going to hang out here for the next 24 hours. Then there's some divergence here where we've got some that are up here, some are out here over the Gulf of Mexico. The GFS model even at one point, had this thing going up into, Oklahoma. There we go, like that. Or, you're going to see it zoom off through Tennessee. Different scenarios are still on the table right now. The most likely location will be, in the cone area here, but it does mean still trouble for us in Texas and in Louisiana. Watch this high pressure pull south through the Gulf of Mexico, still keeping, our low sitting about right in here. All right, I'll highlight that maybe in a little bit more white color right there. But between that high and that low, is there going to be a window of opportunity for this thing to scoot through there and go off in this direction? We think, at least according to the models, that what they're predicting in the steering flow, that's what's more likely to happen. And we see that with the forecast cone as well. High pressure pushes farther east, low goes farther north, and here goes beta more or less in this direction. All right, so a lot to dissect here, Jackie, but truly over the next, say, 2 to 3 days, it is a big rainmaker.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the big things that we're concerned about in a place like Houston, Texas. It does pose a risk for flash flooding. In fact, new flash flood warnings have just been issued south of Houston, including Galveston and into League City. Our Weather Channel meteorologist Paul Goodlow is in Houston right now. And Paul, I know you've been getting the rain there. We've been seeing some puddling, at least in Houston. But up to this point, we've been able to handle the amount of rain that's fallen. That may not stay true, though.
Right, because you got to remember, this is a pretty big city. Some people call it a sprawling city. It definitely is that for sure. The whole metro area, about 7 million people. But we're kind of drained and kind of the water goes off to a series of bayous. See Buffalo Bayou kind of over here behind me. And this bayou's been rising today, easily 3 or 4 feet than where it normally is. But you have areas along the bayou, kind of the floodplain, so to speak, like this park here, which is also kind of saturated, but it was kind of built up there. It's kind of fill, so it doesn't drain as easily as other soils. But just notice my elevation. I am still a good probably 10 feet from the top of this little sidewalk, which is where Allen Parkway is, and I'm still probably another 15 feet from the top where the water is, if not more. So there's a lot of space for this bayou to kind of spread out. But the bayou has done that before. Even just heavy thunderstorm training events has caused flooding over my head in this park here. And, of course, the benchmark is always going to be Harvey here, at least hopefully always. We don't want a future storm even greater than Harvey. But that took the water up and over my head and over the parkway and into a lot of homes and apartments, even businesses on all sides of downtown here. So we have room to spread out, but we're talking about a huge, gorgeous skyline. There's a lot of concrete, a lot of steel, and that's the thing about cities in heavy rain. It doesn't absorb in the ground like this. It runs off of concrete and then into the low spots, which right now are the bayous that kind of run through and kind of drain this city. But when you have a lot of heavy rain, there's nowhere for this bayou to go but up and up and up and then over its banks. And you mentioned those flash flood warnings south of town, and that's because they're getting the rain first, and then it's rotating northward. We're about 45 miles north of Galveston as the crow flies, but we're still about, say, 90 miles to the northeast, almost east-northeast of the center of Beta. So we're still a ways away. We're seeing that rotation, though, still give us that rain. So we do expect potential flash flooding if we keep getting this type of rain. So the moderate to heavy rain, which comes in wave after wave after wave, and then some kind of spats like this where it's more light rain, but then we also have it followed by moderate and heavy rain. That's the concern, because all that will add up. All that will fill up the bayous, and all that could potentially flood over. So that's what we're watching. We hope we don't have that, but it has been persistent today, and that's definitely raised a lot of eyebrows. In fact, coming up in about 20 minutes, we talked to the mayor earlier, and we'll talk about the readiness of the city to respond for another potential flood disaster that this city is far too familiar with. Jackie?
In pretty good shape too, is because you had a bit of a rainfall deficit going into this. This is heavy rain bands from Beta that arrived in Texas more than 24 hours ago. We've seen reports of widespread flooding in Port O'Connor. Our crews got stuck in this downpour earlier this morning. So let's take a look and talk about some of the rainfall that's come down and what's still to come and what's at risk because of all of this. So, you know, we've kind of been setting the stage with the rain. It's been manageable, so to speak, up to this point for the most part. And now we're starting to get into that territory where our ground is saturated, and any more rain on top of that is not going to be good news. And that's why we're starting to see flood advisories and a few of those warnings being issued. And this has really kind of been the sweet spot from Houston down towards Port O'Connor, where our rain's been pretty persistent for about the last 3 hours. The ground was already saturated on top of that, so now that rain is starting to overcome the system. So this is that new flood advisory, League City down towards Galveston. This is until 6:45 local time. So you don't want to get out there and drive tonight. Just stay at home if you can at all. We're seeing some rainfall estimates around 3-4 inches, which has already come down in these areas, and you could get several more inches on top of that, which is just going to make that situation even worse. So flooding rains will be most likely for the rest of the evening and into tonight, stretching from about Port Lavaca all the way over towards the Louisiana-Texas state line. But notice it's still possible on the periphery of the green. So interesting that we've seen our rainfall, the worst of it, kind of separated into two different spots. That really tells you about the nature, the structure of our tropical storm, which is kind of spread out in terms of the impacts. So two spots that we're watching for flash flooding tomorrow, and that's going to include Houston and Galveston yet again, but then with some of those outer bands that have been pushing in across southern parts of Louisiana, that could include you into the Baton Rouge area. So everybody needs to be on alert in these spots. Rainfall forecast on top of what we've already had could be 3 to 5 inches. The Euro model has been a little robust with all of this, Mike, so we'll have to see. But I think 3 to 5 is probably a good number to have in mind. And so much of it is dependent on when this is going to start to pick up some forward speed, and that could still be maybe 36 hours from now.
It's amazing to think how far out we could still be dealing with beta. Again, it could be days from now, and we know that for sure. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the specifics you'll see in a place, say, like Houston here, with the flow that continues to bring in the bands here. I think that, you know, maybe out here on the Katy Freeway, you could potentially see some blinding rain at times, and I'd urge you not to be driving this evening or overnight. And it could still be a band that sets up. I feel like there's a band that set up like that for about a day or so during Hurricane Harvey. Not saying it's going to be anything like that, but just kind of odd to see that a similar location would see one of those bands. Could we see some brief flooding? It's possible. I think, again, you know, we were talking now, you know, noon tomorrow. If you get 2 or 3 bands over the next, you know, 24-ish hours, I think you'll be okay. Could you have minor issues? Yeah, it's possible. But it's just going to depend on what kind of moisture continues to flow around the center of circulation, how much there's going to be left of beta, how much will land interaction begin to weaken it and dissipate it. But nonetheless, we're still forecasting 3 to 4 inches here through Wednesday evening. So that's about 2 days worth of rain over into Shreveport and Texarkana. These are locations where the heavier rain comes in. More likely tomorrow through Wednesday, maybe even Thursday as well, since the beginning of the month, but manageable. 2 to 3 inches over 3 days, I think is okay, Jackie. There could be brief issues, but I think the overall theme here is ugly forecast, but manageable rain.
Yeah, not fun and not good for travelers either, right? You don't like being out and that kind of stuff. So here's another big issue, and it has to do with that onshore flow or that storm surge as the winds from beta push the salt water up over areas that are normally dry, flooding out roads in southeastern Texas neighborhoods. The rising storm surge is a big threat when it comes to tropical storm beta. So we do have storm surge warnings that remain in effect. And this is the same general area where we have the tropical storm warnings from Port Aransas stretching over towards Port Arthur. And the water level rises generally have been in the 1 to 3 foot range. And we think that's generally where it's going to be sticking around. On the periphery of all this, including Corpus Christi down towards Padre Island, and then over here across much of southern Louisiana, that's where we have coastal flood warnings and advisories just on the outside where it's going to cause issues, but not as bad as some of the surge. But the wind field with this is actually pretty large. It stretches out with the tropical storm force winds about 175 miles away from the center of the storm. And that's why we're seeing such increases of water over a pretty large area. Right now, taking a look at the storm surge, 2.3 feet in Port O'Connor and 2.4 feet in Eagle Point. We'll be right back.
Subaru Safe Driving Guide, brought to you by Subaru. Love, it's what makes Subaru, Subaru.
What kind of value?
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow. We're here in Houston, Texas, next to Buffalo Bayou. We showed you this last hour, and even in that time, it's actually gotten a little higher. Normally already about 3 or 4 feet lower than it is right now, but we've been seeing kind of waves of light followed by moderate and heavy rain. Just finished a little heavy rain band that came on through here. And all this in this city of over 2 million people. A lot of concrete, a lot of steel. It runs off and then into the bayous here, which flows, I guess, as you watch this, left to right on your screen here. Eventually, it goes out towards Galveston Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. But we have a lot of rain here, and we're watching this. This is the biggest concern we have with Beta is those rain bands coming in, like we've been doing for much of today, kind of setting up and giving us, hour after hour after hour. It's been raining pretty much all day long, outside of maybe a few dry hours this morning, and that's a concern. So we're talking well over an inch, some areas 2 or 3 inches of rain already, and we could see maybe twice that amount before all is said and done. Beta, the center, is making landfall about 90 miles from here, but we are still dealing with this rain, and that center still won't pass Houston until perhaps another 36 hours. So we have that large window of potential rain coming on through here and doing a number on the city. It doesn't have to be a hurricane or a full-fledged tropical storm to cause impacts. And we're seeing that rain, the biggest impact, and the resulting flooding is something we'll watch closely here in this country's 4th largest city. Mike?
Paul Goodlow reporting for us in Houston tonight. Paul, thank you very much. We take you over to New Orleans. This is Lake Pontchartrain, and look at what the winds from Beta are doing here, pushing some water here up over the sidewalks. Things are sloshing around, aren't they? And think about how far away, New Orleans is from Port O'Connor, Texas. It's a bit of a drive, folks. Let me just put it that way, okay? I'll show it to you on the map and give you some perspective of how this is all playing out for us, okay? Beta happening at Central Texas coast, so it's sitting right about there. Lake Pontchartrain way over here, folks. You're like, how's that possible? We've got a pretty good south wind here, and we've got winds that are spiraling around Beta at this point. 45-mile-per-hour winds, northwest moving at 5 miles per hour. And really, the tropical storm force winds are mostly east side loaded. Extends way out over into Texas here, reaching beyond Galveston, but to just a short amount on the backside here where the tropical storm force winds only extend a small bit back to the south and west here. Hard to find even where the center is. It could at any point truly be making a landfall for us here. Corpus Christi at 20, Houston 16, Lake Charles gusty to 23-mile-per-hour winds for you here. The persistent onshore flow bring us more and more bands of rain. Now, if you get stuck in one of these bands, I think you could get some high water on the roads briefly until the storm drains catch up to it and the rain backs off. But ultimately, Jackie, we're in this for a while, probably the next 2 to 3 days in Texas and in Louisiana.
All right, Mike, I'm going to one-up you. Thanks to our weather producer, Sarah Dillingham. She says it's about 400 miles between Port O'Connor and New Orleans where they're feeling those impacts. Well, it's more than 800 miles from Hurricane Teddy to the North Carolina coast, where we are seeing large swells and all kinds of water washing up onto the shore. It's covering roads, it's eroding the beaches, and even Highway 12 for a time in the Outer Banks had to close. I think it actually shut down twice yesterday so that they could clear off all the sand, and the water just got too high. Of course, on top of all this, Teddy has been creating some really dangerous rip current conditions along the beaches. But it really is impressive to think about that we have a hurricane that's east of Bermuda, that is churning up the Atlantic Ocean and bringing all kinds of issues up and down the eastern seaboard. It's not just the Carolinas. It stretches really from New England all the way down into parts of Florida. But there are some other factors helping to influence influence that. We'll start out with the basics, the nuts and bolts here with Hurricane Teddy. It's a Category 1 hurricane, 90-mile-per-hour maximum sustained winds, just pulling north and east right now of Bermuda. And notice how it's kind of looking a little more elongated here. It's starting to become extra tropical as it interacts with the jet stream and a trough of low pressure that is pushing through the region just to the north of here. So it may intensify actually just a little bit as it does that. It gets that extra energy from the jet stream and the Gulf Stream as well. And then it's expected to make a landfall sometime in the middle of the week in Nova Scotia, Halifax. Goodness, this only happens, you know, a handful of times in the past. But it's not just Teddy. It's the pressure gradient between Teddy and this big area of high pressure that's bringing us the fabulous fall conditions across the eastern third of the country. So that's driving in those winds from the north, and that is helping to bring those water levels up in addition to those battering waves as a result of this. So not a good day or a good week really to get into the water. Well, we've got a lot more to come here on Weather Underground for tonight as we continue to track Tropical Storm Beta and show you where the threat of heavy rain and flooding could last for days after Beta comes ashore. Plus, don't forget, you can get even more tropical coverage on social media.
A smile.
Tracking Tropical Storm Beta tonight right here on Weather Underground. We could potentially be, you know, maybe just hours away from a landfall if it were to happen here in the Texas Gulf Coast. Glad you could be with us. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris, or maybe it's going to linger a little longer closer to the coast, right?
Yeah.
Certainly going to be a close shave, Mike, but either way you slice it, it's really going to be lingering in Texas for a couple of days still. So this is a live look in Galveston, Texas. You can see the shaking on the camera, and look at those rough waves out there. Not good stuff.
It looked like this yesterday. It looks like it today. It'll look like this tomorrow, and maybe even the day after. So get used to it, unfortunately. Just a slow-moving system that's kind of prodding along here. And I think this is a really telling shot, too. You got a lot of onshore push here, but it's not extreme, right? We don't have big crashing waves up over the seawall here in Galveston or anything like that. It's just crummy weather overall. There are actually people in the water. I'm not sure why, but there are some folks out there in the water. There's a rip current risk out there, too. Maybe they just, I don't know. Some people just kind of have this this need to be out there and say, I was in the tropical storm or whatever. We just want you to be smart, folks. And if the beaches are closed, stay off the beaches here. And just be smart when you're traveling, because there could be some areas of high water and want you to be safe in your car. All right, so what's happening with Tropical Storm Beta? 45-mile-per-hour winds, northwest movement at 5, sits right here, just hugging the coastline right now. By the way, we'll get a new update from the Hurricane Center here in less than half an hour. Give us a new position update. Maybe we'll get a wind speed update as well. We'll see. But you can see that we've also got some rain that's heavy at times rolling through Texas right now. Also got some heavy rain rolling through Louisiana. In New Orleans, by the way, an east wind at 14, gusting to 25. And look at the flow here, by the way. Look at all the rain coming into, you know, like Shell Beach, Grand Isle, Louisiana. And then you've got a northeast wind in Houston at 15. You got a northwest wind in Corpus Christi at 20. So the big circulation, if you will, around Beta at this point. Jamaica Beach has seen 4 feet of water. Aransas Pass has got water covering the roadways here. So it is happening. Some of it's happening with an onshore flow that comes in off the Gulf of Mexico. And some of it, and you can see, you know, 2.5 to 3 feet of water rise here. Some of it is actually occurring with an offshore wind here, and you're getting some sound side flooding here. So issues to be found both sides of Tropical Storm Beta at this point. And certainly flooding is going to be an ongoing issue. We have likely flooding highlighted in yellow on this map, including the areas that are right near the coastline here, but Port Lavaca up toward Galveston, Houston, maybe beyond, where we get several inches of rain that comes in here. So modeling a good chunk of 3 to 5 inches of rain with pockets of a little bit more than that, and similar for us here right at the Louisiana shore. But ultimately, Jackie, because of its slow movement, we end up getting more rain.
Yeah, more rain, more surge that's going to continue in places. We want to find out what's happening there right now on the coast. Our meteorologist Mike Seidel is joining us live right now from Port O'Connor. And Mike, I know you changed location, so what did you see and what's all been happening there in the last hour?
Well, we continue to get the rainfall, but it's not a very heavy rainfall. We really got most of it between 4 and 6. We're on the air over at Matagorda Bay. Now, Matagorda Bay is out in that direction. We've moved out here to this kind of a narrow shipping channel. On the other side is Espiritu Santo Bay, and that also goes to Matagorda Bay. So if you're on a boat, you just take a left and you get out to the bay. And boy, it is rough. Let me show you the wave action. This is near where we were earlier today, between about 4 and 6 Eastern, and look at the waves. Now again, this is not right out of the Gulf of Mexico. We've got the barrier island out there, and that blocks the big crashing waves, and certainly that's where we've got the beach erosion, no doubt. Port Aransas down in Matagorda Beach, and right now on Matagorda Beach, we're getting some very heavy rain. In fact, let's go to the radar because we've got that band, and the center, as Mike Bettis mentioned, may be trying to get on shore right now, but that band right there, very heavy rain. And then you go inland, Palacios up to Bay City. Some of those rain gauges are up over 2.5 inches of rain as those bands have come in. Down here, we've had about 1.5 inches or so of rainfall so far today, most of that falling between 4 and now, but the water all over here. Now, this is where you would launch your boat, but the surge right now is up about 2.3 feet. We topped out at 3.2 feet this morning. The tide is going out, and the next high tide is after midnight tonight. But this is Froggy's Bait Dock. Again, water surrounding that. There are the shrimp boats. So a lot of high water, certainly anywhere near any kind of estuary, the bay, any of these bays, Matagorda Bay, and water in a lot of the streets because of this surge. And Jackie, the wind's still blowing north. Eventually, it'll come around to the northwest once it comes in. Our peak gusts so far now, 44 miles an hour, which gives you an idea. We have a 45-mile-an-hour sustained wind with a tropical storm. Back to you, Jackie.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. Still more to come on Weather Underground, including the latest on Hurricane Teddy, far away from the Carolina coastline, but causing big problems.
Still your best friend.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Want to show you what's going on out there in the Gulf of Mexico, all courtesy of Tropical Storm Beta. Just point the boat right into the waves. You got no other choice, but watch this one crash right over the bow.
Yeah, that one sucked.
Yep. I'm not sure if you heard what the captain said there, but he was impressed. Let's just put it that way. That's all from a tropical storm. From just a tropical storm, a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm over in Texas. That was Louisiana, right? So far reach with this one, that's for sure. All right, we've got a pretty good band right now rolling in from Galveston through Houston over toward Katy tonight. Watch for some brief flooding with that one. Pretty good storm coming in north of Port O'Connor. And then notice that we've got some north or northwest flow that's happening around Ostwell here, and then some sound side flooding as a result of that flow. We've got marine warnings in effect here off Grand Isle. We've got a pretty good slug of rain that's rolling in from the south here. Strong east wind happening for us in New Orleans right now. 14 gusting to 25. Lake Charles similar. 13 gusting to 23. In Houston now 16 gusting to 24. Corpus Christi not to be outdone. Sustained winds at 20 miles per hour. All right, Tropical Storm Beta, where does it go and how long are we going to be dealing with this? It's going to be a while, folks. So there's a look at the forecast that through tomorrow only keeps it about right here within that circle. Isn't that something where that might end up right there? I'll do it in yellow. Maybe it'll stand out a little bit more. It barely budges. Over the course of 2 days, it's only going to move about this far. Still sitting maybe over Texas at this point. Potentially it could come out over the Gulf of Mexico, could go north of Houston. Both of those scenarios are on the table for us here, but it weakens each and every step of the way, Jackie. What doesn't, though? The onshore storm surge flooding and the rain.
Yeah, it's the storm that doesn't want to end. It's really in the midst of the season that doesn't want to end either, right? It's just been record-breaking almost since the very beginning. We're in the peak of the hurricane season, but we've just passed that hump now. So it's a little bit of good news, but still it's a decent chunk of the hurricane season that we still have ahead of us. In fact, nearly still 40% is on the way. So we've been very busy. We've had so many named storms, almost 24 named storms, and almost half of them have happened in the last month. So take a look at this. You know, we started out with Arthur in the month of May. We started and went into June. Remember Cristobal? We certainly didn't forget that one. Hannah, we've had Faye, so many named storms, and here we are working our way now through the Greek alphabet, including Beta. Could we get another one? Certainly on the table, as we have a lot of the hurricane season left to go. So let's take a look at how this compares to what we would typically expect. And so far, we've had 23 named storms this year. An average year, we would get about 8 up to this point in the season. Now, we've had other seasons that have exceeded 23 as a whole, but we haven't finished our season just yet. So this just compares how many storms we've had up to this point. As for hurricanes, we've had 8 of those. That's double what we would typically have. But the one area where we're lacking a little bit, or actually at average where we should be, is major hurricanes. We've had 2 of those, and that's about what you would expect. So let's take a look at who made landfall. We've had 8 storms that made landfall somewhere on the U.S. coastline, plenty all over the place in the Gulf, and plenty all over the place up and down the eastern seaboard. So when you look at 8 and you compare that to the record is 9. Guess what? We still have Beta out there that has not made landfall. So Beta will tie that record, which was set back in 1916. So Mike, that tells you this goes way, way back, and we could have storms beyond Beta still.
It's been a bit, to say the least. Jackie, thank you for that. As Tropical Storm Beta meanders along the Texas coast here, some heavy rain and surge could pose a significant risk of flooding. In the city of Houston is where we find meteorologist Paul Goodloe for us tonight. Paul, we know just because of the topography there, how we've got a major metropolitan area, we're at risk for flooding here. Some of the rainfall that we see from this, especially since it's so slow moving, could be an issue.
Definitely. In fact, we've kind of walked a little lower, closer to Buffalo Bayou on the way down here. We're noticing a lot more runoff from the fields here. Got some volleyball fields. And in fact, when we were here last month for Laura, we saw the University of Houston Cougar baseball team practicing on these fields. But you can see, look how the water runs. It's all running into Buffalo Bayou. Buffalo Bayou starts about 20, 30 miles west of here in Katy and comes through downtown, then runs on towards the ship channel and eventually in the Galveston Bay, and then boom, that's where all this water is draining to, all the heavy rain we had. Not raining right now, but we've seen quite a bit of rain already and more to come. But this bayou is already several feet higher than it normally would be. You didn't have a day and a half of almost constant rain here. Also, yes, you see debris because this is coming through a very urban area as well. But Houston and flooding go hand in hand. We had a lot of experience with flooding as well. We talked with Mayor Sylvester Turner earlier today about what his city might have to go through.
Houston is pretty much battle tested. We understand we could say we're expecting anywhere from 4 to 7 inches and can end up having a lot more. Mother Nature will do what Mother Nature does. And so you simply have to be on alert. You have to be very careful. You have to constantly listen to the weather reports.
I was sworn into the United States.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Weather Channel. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel. Port O'Connor, Texas, still getting quite a bit of wind, sustained out about 31 knots. Now, 34 knots is tropical storm force. We're right at about 34 to 35 miles an hour. And what you're seeing behind me is this kind of a little shipping channel that takes you out to Matagorda Bay. Boy, is that all churned up. We were showing you that earlier. But the surge is still up. This is normally dry ground. And what we talk about surge, how many feet above normally dry ground. Right now, we're about 2.3 to 2.4 feet. Earlier today, 3.2 feet. So this usually is asphalt out to where you launch your boats here. This is Froggy's Bait Dock, and it's surrounded by water. You can see the flags whipping in the wind. Our peak gust up around 44 miles an hour. Keep in mind, this is a lower situation as far as the tropical storm scale goes. 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm. That's why we're not going to get gusts, thankfully, of 60 or 70 miles an hour. That's not going to happen. So power outages, very low on the threshold here. The bar is pretty low with that kind of wind. But we still have a lot of water in the streets, not only here, but up towards Surfside, Freeport, Galveston, that Strand area, that a consistent problem with the Back Bay water getting blown in with this wind direction. So Mike Bettis, still the impacts of the surge and the rainfall, but the rainfall has been spread out enough across the coastal area of Texas that so far I've not seen one flash flood warning. We'll keep our fingers crossed, but the flash flood watches go up at least and through tomorrow evening in this part of the state.
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much. You're right. It hasn't occurred yet. That's a good thing. And if we can, continue to weaken this system, if we can move it maybe even offshore a bit, that would really benefit us. Mike, thank you so much. How about the view that we're getting now from Galveston? That's a live look over the seawall here and out on the water. The waves just keep marching ashore here. The good news about Galveston is that we've got a big seawall here that's served us well over the years, and this is not going to threaten you. Not a storm surge threatened Galveston, at least on the Gulf side. Could you potentially get some flooding into Galveston and get some water rise there because of some issues with some rainfall and surge coming in from other locations? Yeah, it's possible, but just not at the seawall. I don't think it's going to happen at the seawall at all. 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm. I got to tell you, on the satellite, it is not impressive at all. Almost all the thunderstorm activity has really waned. There's one tiny little cluster of thunderstorms in it, and that is all, folks. Northwest movement at 5. Potentially means we could see a landfall tonight, not guaranteeing it completely because it could still maybe stay out over water, but the most likely thing to happen is it comes just barely on shore and then starts to move its way eastbound here. And by, this time tomorrow, it could still be holding on to tropical storm strength. There's just not much to it right now, although we do have a big broad circulation that's bringing in plenty of rain now from, say, Galveston up through Houston. Did you see that little blow up that we had on this satellite? You see that little orange blip that we had? That's it right there. That's the cluster of thunderstorms near the center, and that is truly it. So there's not much to it at this point, and we're happy to report that. If we do tend to get a little bit increase in the windshield